It is rare if you statistically look at all of the, well, really an infinite number of subjects that you could give a sermon, split sermon, or a message on. It seems virtually impossible that any two would be similar. Well, maybe until today, but Mike mentioned the focus on Sermon on the Mount. I'll be there today as well. I was nervous. I was sweating bullets a little bit as he danced all around it and, in fact, read it, but it'll still be different, and our minds are obviously working somewhat similar, hopefully for good reason. Of course, Passover coming up, the idea and the thought, the practice of examining ourselves is of utmost importance. And I'd like to cover what I think is a specific leaven. Certainly there are many things we can focus on, but we look around us today in the world, there's certainly a crisis of truth in our culture. And often truth is the first casualty of interactions between people. If you think about that, if you're under stress, lie. That'll get you out. Something happens, misrepresent it, twist it, distort it, push the subject somewhere else. So again, truth is often, and probably is, the most often thing that's the first casualty of interactions between people. Look around the world today, certainly in the United States, which has, I think, about 5% of the world's population and like 80% of the attorneys in the world. We've got an elaborate legal system, all based on the idea of, of course, lawyers, contracts, signatures, all the fine print, collateral, lawsuits, all those things, disclaimers, largely, if not almost exclusively, because people don't follow through with promises. The idea that, we cannot keep our word, results in much more of a litigious society than would otherwise be necessary. But if you ask yourself, how many times in a day does the average person lie? I'd like to read something. I almost find it hard to believe, but I Googled many different searches, and oddly enough, it does seem legit. Reference.com says this. Let me just read this. While the number of lies told by an individual during a day varies greatly, there have been scientific studies performed to get an accurate number. These studies indicate that the average individual lies more than 100 times a day. Continuing, a study was published in the Journal of Basic and Applied Psychology about the act of lying. The experiment involved two strangers conversing with each other for 10 minutes while their conversations were recorded. Although each subject believed they had been telling the truth, after reviewing the footage, the scientists found that 60% of all subjects lied within 10 minutes, and the average amount of lies during this time span was 2.92 per subject. So basically, in a 10-minute conversation, 60% of the population will lie 3 times. Isn't that unbelievable? And they believe, what's really sad, they believe they're telling the truth. This world around us, of course, as Mike mentioned, is Satan's world. We're so used to being lied to, we expect to be lied to. Advertising is built on, obviously, lies. Political world, obviously, we don't need to go there, but is also built on lies. The legal system, attorneys don't have to always represent what they know is true. They have to represent their client, even if guilty. So, there's lots of things in our society that program us to be liars. All you have to be is open and receptive to, of course, the prince and power of the air, and you will be a liar. We are all liars, obviously. We don't want to be that as a matter of character, but we do. We lie, and we don't even recognize it oftentimes. So today, we're going to talk about that, of course. There's two ends of the spectrum. Of course, we know that on one end, John 14:6, about Christ, and Christ himself saying, I am the way and the truth. Another passage, John 17:17, your word is truth. So on one end, of course, God's end of the spectrum is truth. Absolute truth, no lies, God cannot lie. On the other end of the scale, of course, we know Satan the father of lies, we're told in John 8, verse 44. So that's the two ends. Of course, the world around us lives and thrives almost exclusively on Satan's end of the spectrum. Truth is hard to find in anything nowadays. The art of redirecting the conversation. Again, you can watch a news release or press release. Of course, tricking people. If you have the facts, you can trick people into any way, shape, or form. You can just lead them to where you want them to go. Of course, fake news is a buzz phrase out there. Lies, misrepresentation, bending the truth. Of course, you can say something truthful, but do it in a way that is misleading. White lies, well, it's no big deal. It's not harmful. Overpromise things. Oh, yeah, I'm going to do this for you. No, you're not. You just lied. You know you're not going to do it. Just tell me that. I'm a home builder. I wish people would just tell me the truth all the time. Dave, I'm not going to be there tomorrow. I know I said I'm not going to be there. In fact, I probably won't be there for 3 days, if even then. I'd be like, well, I don't like it, but at least I know what I'm dealing with. But, they'll overpromise. Oh, yeah, I'm going to get that done today. No. It's going to take me 10 phone calls, 3 more days, getting upset, and then you're finally going to show up. Well, I would rather, wouldn't you, somebody just tell you, look, Dave, I don't really care about your business. I'll get there when I can, and it'd probably be sometime next week. Well, okay. At least you'd save yourself the frustration of all the attempts at interaction in between. But again, people don't. They overpromise. We can look at nuances, omissions. You can lie by omitting things, obviously. Exaggeration happens all the time. Half-truths, one-sided story. You can see something, you can tell, well, this person said this, and just don't even mention the other side of the story, which may completely justify the side of the story that you chose to share. Redirecting, somebody puts you under pressure. Avoid telling the truth by trying to redirect this conversation. It's a form of lying. And we do these things all the time and don't think about it. Confuse people. If they ask you a question, give them some answer that just confuses them. Trick them. Isn't that easy to do? Gossip often is a form of lying. Silence can be a lie. Again, there are times, of course, through prudence, through good judgment, through wisdom, that you're much better off to just say nothing, obviously. But again, oftentimes, when we know we should say something, but we keep silent, that could be a form of lying. Innocent lies, covering for others. Well, I'm going to lie about this person. I'm going to make a story because if my boss says one more thing, he's going to fire him. So I'll make up some excuse for my colleague. It's lying. Again, all these things that we do almost just as a matter of character, because we're so used to doing it. It's around us. We see it every day. Unfortunately, semantics, that's a big one. Well, did you do this? Well, no, I didn't do that. I participated in the team that ultimately did this, so I didn't do it. I mean, whatever the semantics may be, but you could play games to justify things in your mind when you know you're lying. We do those things. Why? Self-preservation. It all comes down to pride and vanity, of course, but we're going to look at this today in detail in Matthew 5. So the SPS is, as you would know, in our everyday communications, we should always speak the truth. Doesn't mean that we don't keep quiet or silent at times. Bite your tongue and say nothing may be their best thing. But in our everyday communication, we should always speak the truth. Proverbs 12, verse 22 tells us, don't need to turn here, lying lips are an abomination to the Lord, but those who deal truthfully are his delight. Lying lips are an abomination to God. On his end of the scale, which is, again, truth, he's the way, the truth, his word is truth, he cannot lie. That's where he wants us to be. Not using nuances and cleverness to escape truth for self-preservation, whatever it may be. ego. Just be truthful. It's often the easiest way, and quite frankly, it's so refreshing that most of the time you end up with a much better result. If you would, turn to Matthew 5. Matthew 5, verse 33. Mike so graciously warmed you up on all this. Matthew 5, verse 33. We'll read down through verse 37. Matthew 5, verse 33. Again, you have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not swear falsely, but shall perform your oaths to the Lord. But I say to you, do not swear at all, neither by heaven, for it is God's throne, nor by the earth, for it is his footstool, nor by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. Verse 36, nor shall you swear by your head, because you cannot make one hair white or black. Well, we've learned that there are ways to do that. Verse 37, but let your yes be yes and your no, no. For whatever is more than these is from the evil one. Pretty straightforward. Anything more than that is of Satan, the prince and power of the air. But what is the key point of this passage? This Matthew 5, verse 33 through verse 37. Is it no swearing, no oaths, no covenants, no contracts even? A contract is a vow. It's an oath to perform something, isn't it? No vows. We often read this. I know I have in the past. And I think, if I'm ever in front of a court, then I have to say, I affirm. I can't swear. I can't take an oath. Is that really the key point in this passage? Well, let's look at this in context first, because it's important to understand that. Because the point, of course, that is not the main point. So the first reason we know that is Christ tells us in the beginning of the passage, Matthew 5, verse 17, just look back at Matthew 5, verse 17. Christ was saying that laws that he was there to explain were not being eliminated or changed. So again, in context, it gives us the answer to the question of, is the key point about not swearing, not taking oaths, not taking vows? Because that can be a distraction. It could be a twist on things and really undermines the credibility and the key point that Christ was making. So again, Matthew 5, verse 17, let's read. Do not think that I came to destroy the law or prophets. I did not come to destroy, but to fulfill. Verse 18, for assuredly I say to you, till heaven and earth pass away, one jot or one tittle will by no means pass from the law till all is fulfilled. Whoever therefore breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches men so shall be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does and teaches them, he shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven. So Christ here, in the very Sermon on the Mount, he's saying the laws that I'm about to reference, that Christ is about to expound, he's saying they're not done away with. He's not coming to destroy them. He says, matter of fact, one dot of any letter or the cross of any T had better not be taken from the law, or you'll be least in the kingdom. So again, in context, Christ is telling us that the laws about vows, about swearing, weren't going away with what he was about to teach, but he's going to expand them. He's going to make them bigger, more difficult in that sense, more meaningful, more applicable. And it's important to understand that, because the teaching of the law, you don't need to turn to all these passages, but the teaching of the law that they would have been thinking of are some of these verses. Leviticus 19, verse 11. Again, these are what the laws that Christ was not eliminating. Leviticus 19, verse 11. You shall not steal, nor deal falsely, nor lie to one another. Interesting. That's always been a command, but Christ expounds it. Verse 12, and you shall not swear by my name falsely, nor shall you profane the name of your God. I am the Lord. Another passage that they would have been familiar with, again, his subjects, the students, the Pharisees and Sadducees, Sanhedrin included. Numbers 30, verse 2. Again, you don't need to turn to these. If a man makes a vow to the Lord or swears an oath to bind himself by some agreement, he shall not break his word. He shall do accordingly to all that proceeds out of his mouth. Even if it results in him sinning, Mr. Petty covered that in a message not so long ago. If you make a vow or a commitment or a promise, God expects, even if it's to your own harm, and in fact, even if it's sin to you, that's how serious a vow, a commitment, a promise should be. You have to just fulfill it. Hard to believe that, isn't it? That's how important it is. And also Deuteronomy 23, verse 21, I'll read here quickly. Deuteronomy 23, verse 21. When you make a vow to the Lord your God, you shall not delay to pay it, for the Lord your God will surely require it of you, and it would be sin to you. Verse 22. But if you abstain from vowing, sometimes a good idea, right? But if you abstain from vowing, it shall not be sin to you. That which has gone from your lips, you shall keep and perform, for you voluntarily vowed to the Lord your God what you have promised with your mouth. So again, Christ was saying that he was not coming to eliminate what we just read. So again, the key there is that he wasn't altering, he wasn't saying all those ideas in the Old Testament to us that he was doing away with. It's important to understand that. The word oath, just to kind of look at this at a different perspective, the word oath appears 100 times in the Bible. Vow, 76 times. Agreement, 15 times. Testament, 3 times. Covenant, 315 times. Testify, 33 times. You get over 500 uses of words that relate to vows and swearing, testifying, commitments, oath. So Christ was saying, I'm not coming to eliminate those 500 uses or applications in the Bible. He said he's coming to make it even more broad, more important, deeper, giving, again, a spiritual meaning to those commands. A second way that we know, again, that this passage is important to understand, that it's not about don't swear, don't take vows, and so forth, is the very examples that Christ covers in Matthew 5. In Matthew 5, verse 21, he covers murder. Well, he's not saying, hey, I'm here to do away with the laws concerning murder. As long as you don't, hate your brother, you can murder. That's okay. I mean, obviously it's proof in context. Verse 27, adultery. He didn't come to say, well, the laws concerning adultery are done away with. Don't commit adultery, but just don't lust after somebody. He was expounding, making more broad, making the application more universal, not limiting or eliminating the laws. Verse 31 with divorce, the same thing. Basically says no divorce, except for infidelity. A third way, or proof, so to speak, because it's important that the passage is not about that legalese, so to speak, of vows and swearing, is examples still exist in God's word of vows, of commitments, of contracts, of covenants, of testifying. Marriage. Well, if he did away with swearing or taking a vow, how would you have marriage? It's a solemn, obviously, commitment or vow between God and a spouse. Baptism, isn't that a vow? Of course, it's a covenant. It's a contract made with God through Christ. God swore an oath to David that one of his descendants would always sit on the throne. Acts 2, verse 30. Well, if he was doing away with swearing, vows, and taking oaths, how do all these examples still persist in God's word? Another example would be God has sworn an oath to us. Let's read that, because it's interesting. Hebrews 6, verse 13. God has sworn an oath to us. Hebrews 6, verse 13. For when God made a promise to Abraham, because he could swear by no one greater, he swore by himself, saying, surely blessing I will bless you, and multiplying I will multiply you. Verse 15. And so, after he had patiently endured, he obtained the promise. For men indeed swear by the greater. Verse 16, for men indeed swear by the greater, and an oath for confirmation is for them an end of all disputes. It doesn't say that they shouldn't do that. Verse 17, thus God, determining to show more abundantly to the heirs of promise the immutability of his counsel, confirmed it by an oath, that by two immutable things in which it is impossible for God to lie, we might have strong consolation who have fled for refuge to lay hold of the hope set before us. God says he's taken an oath with us. Well, if oaths, vows, contracts, commitment, promises are done away with, we wouldn't have all these examples in God's word. Another is that Jesus was willing to testify under oath. Mike, in the first message, read that. He answered. He testified under oath. He says, "It is as you say." Christ answered under oath. Paul made solemn oaths in his epistles. Listen to these. 2 Corinthians 1, verse 23. "I call God as witness against my soul," Paul writes in his epistles. He's saying, I testify, as God is my witness. He's testifying. He's taking an oath. He's saying what I'm saying is true. What I'm saying is faithful. He also does that in Romans 1, verse 9, Philippians 1, verse 8, 1 Thessalonians 2, verse 5. I mean, he often did that. Another example is an angel of God swore an oath. Revelation 10, verse 5. Revelation 10, verse 5, I'll read. "The angel whom I saw standing on the sea and on the land raised up his hand to heaven and swore by him who lives forever and ever." So you can see that, again, the purpose of Christ's explanation is important. The Sermon on the Mount, one of the biggest subjects in there, it's multiple verses, is Matthew 5, verse 33 through 37. And he wasn't saying don't swear, don't be truthful under oath, or don't give oaths, don't enter into contracts, don't testify, don't swear. Because if you read it that way, you're missing the point. Obviously, contracts, as I mentioned, are also oaths. We live in a world without contracts, which ideally would be true. So what is the key? Of course, we know that the key in context, if you turn back to Matthew 5, if you're not still there, the key, of course, in context is that we go beyond law keeping to the spirit of the law. And let's look at Matthew 5, verse 17. Again, Christ specifically tells us this is the purpose. Matthew 5, verse 17. "Do not think that I came to destroy the law or the prophets," which we've read. "I did not come to destroy, but to fulfill, to broaden, to fill up, to expand, to expound." Verse 20, skipping to verse 20. "For I say to you that unless your righteousness exceeds the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, you will by no means enter the kingdom of heaven." So what were the Pharisees doing in regards to swearing, to taking vows? Because that's really the point. Christ wasn't saying, well, don't do away with that, just like adultery. He's not saying, well, the laws of adultery still exist. And the laws concerning vows and swearing and oaths still exist. But what's the problem? How were they abusing or twisting those oaths and vows? If you would turn to John 8, verse 44. John 8, verse 44, of course, the Pharisees were twisting the application of the law, which, of course, they, as hypocrites, often did. Not always, but often did. The laws concerning vows or testifying or taking an oath were very specific. We read some of those. So in their mind, we got to find a way to keep the letter of those laws, but twist it. That's what they did. John 8, verse 44, of course, Christ speaking to the Pharisees later says this: "You, Pharisees, are of your father the devil, and the desires of your father you want to do." Again, they have motives behind the scenes. "He was a murderer from the beginning and does not stand in the truth, because there is no truth in him. When he speaks a lie, he speaks from his own resources, for he is a liar and the father of it." That's pretty harsh, right? To the point. He's a liar. And the spirit around us in this world is of lies. Read any article that's printed, and there's some twist, there's some political motivation, they're trying to sell something. It's hard to get anything truthful. And we succumb to that. It rubs off on us in how we deal with people. Again, as I mentioned in my introduction, the first casualty to go between interaction is the truth. Why? Because it's so easy. I'll just say something, I'll just make up something, it'll sound better, and they'll leave me alone. My employer is asking me a poignant question about my performance, I'll blame somebody else, whatever it might be. So again, here, John verse 8:44, the phrase, he speaks from his own resources, The NIV says he speaks his native language. I thought that's interesting. That's really who he is. Anything else he's learned sounds better, but his native language is one of lies. It's an interesting translation. The English Standard Version says he speaks out of his own character. Same thing. We find clever ways, and Satan, of course, does. He's very, very clever at it, of ways to twist the truth, clever ways to make lies look appealing. We live in a world filled with lies. Every conversation you have probably has lies in it. You're just not used to it. You're not used to thinking about telling the truth. I'm the same way. People in the street, people in business, over promises, all those things is just so ingrained into us. Another way that the Pharisees had twisted things was that they were only honoring vows sworn to the Lord. And that's why this is important, covering the actual laws that Christ was referring to. Basically, other vows became meaningless. So again, if you're twisting the law and the law says, keep your vows to the Lord, well, okay, I'll honor any vow if I use God's name, but any other thing I say, it could all be filled with lies. So they use vows as cover for lies. Again, they're twisting it. And does that sound like us? Well, it's not in the contract, so I can say what I want. Well, I'm not using the Lord's name. I'm not taking God's name into this conversation, because I didn't say, well, God is my witness, and then you say something. Well, I didn't say that, so I can exaggerate. I can twist the truth. I can misrepresent. I can omit. I can do all these things that we talked about. It's the same thing the Pharisees did. Exact same thing. As long as we don't invoke God's name, or my hand's on the Bible, or I'm in front of a judge, and even that I should probably say I affirm, because I don't really know. That's not the intent. Christ was not saying don't swear, don't make commitments, don't have vows, don't take oaths. He's saying your conversation should always be truthful, and you shouldn't need those things. That's how he expanded the meaning of the law. Another things that the Pharisees did is they made arbitrary distinctions between their oaths or vows. So again, an oath or a vow became a facade for lying. So again, if you read Matthew 23, verse 16, let me read Matthew 23, verse 16. Woe to you, blind guides, who say, whoever swears by the temple, cool, no big deal. You don't have to keep that. But whoever swears by the gold of the temple, he is obligated to perform it. Verse 17, fools and blind, for which is greater, the gold or the temple that sanctifies the gold? Verse 18, and whoever swears by the altar, it is nothing. But whoever swears by the gift that is on the altar, he's obligated or obliged to perform it. Verse 19, fools and blind, Christ says, for which is greater, the gift or the altar that sanctifies the gift? Verse 20, therefore he who swears by the altar swears by it and by all things on it. Verse 21, and he who swears by the temple swears by it and by him who dwells in it. And he who swears by heaven swears by the throne of God and by him who sits on it. Pharisees were saying, well, I swear on the temple. Everything else that preceded, it could all be lies. It's no big deal. It is nothing. I swear by the altar, no big deal, because I didn't use God's name. So again, if we look at that passage as well, it means really if you're ever called before a judge, you shouldn't swear. It says do not swear. Now, he said, I'm not coming to undo the laws about swearing and vows. He said, I'm coming to make it where it means every single word that proceeds out of your mouth every single day of every minute of your life should be the truth. There's nobody in this room that's true of. And most of the time, as that survey read, people believe they're telling the truth, but they're exaggerating their performance. They're exaggerating, they're covering, they're twisting. I don't want to say this because I won't look quite as good, so I'll color it a little bit. You're lying. You're twisting. Again, some things can be done in fun and jest. Again, we're not all these things, obviously, there's a balance to, we should always tell the truth. That is the point. That doesn't change. And Christ calls them fools, blind. He calls them that multiple times, fools and blind. You're not of your Father the truth. You do not see Christ as the truth, the way, the life. They had hidden motives, and they were of Satan, their father, who is a liar. And they twisted the law to basically give them permission to lie. Well, we're not swearing by God's name, so everything else we do or say or enter into can all be a pack of lies. Wow, that's twisting God's truth. But again, does that sound like us? Well, I didn't sign a contract. I said I said I would attend that outing, and I don't show up and I don't call you. I didn't sign a contract, right? I didn't guarantee it. I just said I would be there. Different, right? No, you lied. You weren't there. Did you call, make an effort to say, I'm not going to be there? It's serious enough a matter that if you make a commitment and don't fulfill that, you owe an obligation to explain yourself. We live on earth. We understand that things come up. Times change. Things happen. But to routinely make promises that you or I don't keep is a sin. To continually exaggerate things is a sin. When we're doing it for the purposes like the Sadducees, the Pharisees, they had a hidden motive. Greed, money, issue, pride, vanity, whatever the motive is. Empty promises. I grew up that way. I'm sure many of us did. Have parents, oh yeah, we're going to go camping. No, we're not. Oh yeah, we'll do that. Next summer we're going to do this. My children have seen that. Well, I'm going to come down for a child's wedding. No, you're not. Oh yeah, I'll be at your graduation. No, you're not. Again, we do that in our own way. We make promises, we make commitments, we twist, obscure facts, obscure truth, and it is all a lie of our Father, again, who's broadcasting that. You look at politics, you look at education, you look at any system or society element around us, it's packed full of lies. And truth, again, is the first casualty in almost every relationship because it's such an easy out. If you'll notice in the passage I read, Matthew 23, it doesn't say don't enter into oaths. He who swears by heaven swears by the throne of God and by him who sits on it. He doesn't go on to say don't do that. Why would taking an oath be wrong? If you're saying I'm truthful, I'm going to do this. Well, good, amen. Christ is saying that every word you say should be like an oath, should be like a vow, should be like a commitment, should be like a testimony, should be like a witness, should be like a covenant, should be like a contract, because you're so good for your word all the time. That's how he expanded this meaning. So again, key lessons. I'm just going to read off some thoughts I had in preparing this. Oaths should never be flippant, used to make impressions or to exaggerate our sincerity. Oh, I swear I'm telling the truth. No, just don't say that. Just tell the truth. Oaths, vows, guarantees should not be taken without necessity and seriousness, and avoid them when possible. We can, through reading the scriptures, say that it is better to avoid those things. It shouldn't be something that's so flippant. If you can avoid an oath or a vow or a contract, you should. Again, I'm not saying that we shouldn't just, I'm not going to ever sign anything, don't put my name on anything, I'm never going to make a promise. I'm going to put a disclaimer in everything. Hey, I'll see you tonight. God willing, if this doesn't happen and this doesn't happen, and this, we can't be stupid about it. In your mind, when you intend to be there and when you don't intend to be there. We often say, I'll be there when we know we're not. Why? Because it's a way out. It's an escape. I don't have to give them the legitimate truth. I'm tired, I've been working all week, and I don't want to go. Again, you can say that politely, maybe not like that, but still, the truth is better. The truth is better, especially in dealing with kids. Kids are, they quickly, again, they've got a sixth sense, that kids sense. They know when you're lying to them. When you make promises that you're not going to keep, don't do that. If we reserve truthfulness only for declarations in the form of oaths, vows, or promises, and we neglect truthfulness the rest of the time, it is evil. It makes oaths an instrument of evil. Well, in my mind, I didn't give an oath, therefore I'm okay to lie, to twist, to distort. And only if I was giving an oath, then I would never lie under that circumstance. Well, then you're using an oath as a tool to lie at other times. Oaths must not be devices for lowering the standard of truthfulness that applies to us at all times. That's what the Pharisees did. Well, we can swear by the temple because that's no big deal. We can swear by the altar. That's no big deal. We can swear by all kinds of things. It just sounds good, makes us look good, but we don't really intend to fulfill those promises. It is God's will that we keep our word with all people, even to our own harm. I'll be there. Well, really, I want to stay home and do this. Sorry, you're not going to stay home and do this. You said you'd be there. Go do it. Teach your kids that the same way. Otherwise, don't make those promises because you're lying. And after doing that time and year and month and decade, you just get used to it. We speak that way. We shouldn't. Godly character demands a sincere attempt to meet our promises. We owe an explanation otherwise. Our speech reflects our character and reflects either honor or dishonor to God. Christians must not have multiple standards or levels of truth. Our ordinary speech should be true as an oath at all times. We don't tell the truth because we have taken an oath. We tell the truth because we're truthful. It sounds so simple, but nowadays it's unheard of. It's just unheard of. So in our everyday communication, we should always speak the truth. I'd like to close with Psalm 15, verse 1. Psalm 15, verse 1. Lord, who may abide in your tabernacle, who may dwell in your holy hill? He who walks uprightly and works righteousness and speaks the truth in his heart.